Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We hear about democracy all the time, right? Usually in terms of lofty ideals, human rights, and grand philosophies. But today, we're putting all of that to the side. We're looking past the political rhetoric, and we are going to examine the literal, hard-nosed economics of democratic government. We're going to treat governance exactly like a balance sheet to see what it actually costs to maintain a democratic system, and more importantly, what it pays back. To understand how governments truly function, we really have to start by asking a pretty provocative question. What if we view politics not as some noble clash of ideals, but as a marketplace, a literal marketplace with buyers, sellers, and bottom lines? Now, I know it sounds kind of cynical at first, but viewing the political arena through the lens of economics gives us incredible actionable insight into why politicians do what they do, why campaigns are so incredibly expensive, and why, ultimately, the whole system functions the way it does. So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. Number 1, politics as a marketplace. Number 2, the price tag of voting. 3, the political business cycle. 4, the democratic growth dividend. And 5, the ultimate economic investment. All right, Section 1, politics as a marketplace. Okay, let's dive right in by introducing a completely different lens through which to view our political actors. The foundation of our analysis today rests on this concept called public choice theory. Pioneered by economists like James M. Buchanan and Gordon Tullock, this theory basically strips away the romance of public service. It assumes that everyone in the political system, from the everyday voter to the highest elected official, acts primarily out of rational self-interest, just like they do in the standard economy. Instead of assuming a government is some organic entity making decisions purely for the public good, public choice theory argues that collective action is really just a bunch of individual, self-interested choices aggregated together. Notice the stark contrast here, because it completely flips our standard view of campaigning. Think about a traditional market. Businesses try to maximize their profits by selling you a product, right? Well, in the political market, as economist Anthony Downs famously argued, parties don't win elections to formulate policies. They formulate policies to win elections. Let that sink in for a second. In this model, votes are the currency of the political marketplace. Politicians are the entrepreneurs. And policies, they're just the products they're selling to get your currency. Moving on to Section 2, the price tag of voting. So now that we understand votes as currency, let's look at the literal financial overhead required to keep this democratic marketplace running. Let's be totally clear here. Administering elections is unbelievably expensive. We aren't just talking about flashy campaign ads. We're talking about the nuts and bolts: voter registration, ballot box security, procedural audits. As highlighted by the UN Development Program, these costs are especially shocking in emerging democracies. Getting a transitional democracy off the ground is a massive lift. For example, back in 1993, Cambodia spent a staggering $45.50 per capita just to administer their election. Now, obviously, that cost does drop significantly as institutions stabilize, but that initial investment just to guarantee integrity and security, it's immense. And the financial burden on the individual candidates, it is equally staggering. 140 years. Take a look at this. According to research by the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, in Indonesia, an average person would need to work for 140 years, spending their salary on absolutely nothing else, just to fund a single political campaign. No groceries, no rent. 140 years. That is an absolutely massive barrier to entry in this political marketplace. This matters because these astronomical costs have very real-world consequences. When it takes 140 years of average wages to run for office, well, wealth strictly dictates who gets access to power. It severely limits the participation of marginalized groups, women, and young people. And honestly, even worse, it strongly incentivizes corrupt practices. In some environments like the Maldives, researchers found that up to 75% of a candidate's campaign budget can be set aside for literal vote buying. So the high price tag of democracy, if we don't manage it properly, can actively weaken the legitimacy of the entire system. Let's move to Section 3, the political business cycle. Okay, so we know politicians are self-interested, and we know elections are massively expensive. Let's see how this builds into broader macroeconomic consequences when election day actually approaches. This brings us to a fascinating concept called the political business cycle, formalized by economist William Nordhaus. Since we already established that a politician's primary goal is to acquire the currency of votes to stay in power, it makes perfect rational sense that they would actively manipulate macroeconomic policy just to ensure their re-election. They want the economy to look as strong and robust as possible right when you walk into the voting booth, even if it causes a massive economic hangover later. And you know what? The data confirms this phenomenon perfectly. particularly across emerging markets and developing economies. Research shows that during election years, primary deficits consistently rise by 0.6 percentage points of GDP, and primary spending jumps by 0.5 percentage points. Politicians are essentially opening up the public checkbook to buy goodwill. But as we all know, there is no free lunch in economics. After the votes are counted and the election is won, that pre-election spending spree is almost always unwound through really painful cuts, most frequently in crucial capital spending. Section 4. The Democratic Growth Dividend. Given the massive administrative costs, the self-interested politicians, and that predictable pre-election deficit spending we just talked about, you might be thinking, wow, democracy sounds like a terrible economic investment. But here is the incredible twist in the data. Despite all of its inefficiencies, the constant noise, and the short-term manipulation, transitioning to a democracy actually causes a massive 20 to 25% increase in GDP per capita over the following 25 years. I mean, that is huge. And this isn't just a loose correlation. Rigorous studies by economists analyzing 175 countries over 50 years prove a direct causal link. Democratization is literally one of the strongest drivers of long-term economic growth ever identified. To put that into perspective, even during the massive economic boom of the 1990s, it took the United States 10 whole years to achieve a 25% growth in real per capita GDP. Simply put, democracies deliver. But why? How does a system run by self-interested, vote-maximizing politicians actually produce such spectacular, consistent growth? Well, it ultimately comes down to public goods. Because politicians in a democracy need broad majorities to survive, not just a small, wealthy group of cronies, they are forced to invest in things that benefit the wider population. The data shows that democracies provide 23% more access to safe water and 35% more childhood immunizations compared to autocracies. They also heavily boost electricity access and internet connections. Basically, by being forced to pander to the majority to get those votes, politicians accidentally build a healthier, more educated, and much more productive workforce. And as this graph brilliantly illustrates, there's another core benefit. Looking at this VDem Institute data, as electoral democracy increases, the corruption index ultimately drops. It's a clear trend. When you have strong vertical accountability, meaning the voters can actually fire the politicians at the ballot box, it significantly constrains executive authority. The system demands accurate data, transparent statistics, and forces a tangible reduction in overall corruption. Why? Because the public simply won't tolerate it when it's time to vote. Bringing us to our final part. Section 5, the ultimate economic investment. Let's tally up the ledger and bring this whole thing together. What is the final economic verdict on democratic governance? Simply put, democracy pays off. It pays off because the very mechanisms that make it loud, messy, and expensive are the exact same mechanisms that protect the broader economy. Electoral competition incentivizes the ruling elite to actually disclose accurate data. Think about it. You can't fix an economy if the government is just lying about the inflation rate. Furthermore, democracy channels societal anger and contestation into political compromise rather than destructive violence. It creates a stable, predictable environment. And that predictability is exactly what encourages long-term investment and meaningful economic reform. Now, contrast this with the alternative. Autocracies are a massive drag on the economy. Without the need to win broad public support, autocratic leaders just refashion markets to reinforce their own political dominance. And this inevitably leads to stagnation, widespread cronyism, and severe brain drain as talent flees the country. For businesses, the risks are highly unpredictable. We're talking everything from discriminatory access to government contracts right up to the constant looming threat of arbitrary expropriation of their assets by the state. So while an autocracy might look orderly and quiet on the surface, economically speaking, it is deeply, deeply fragile. Yes, democracy is expensive, for sure. It's a noisy, imperfect system of collective action full of self-interested actors and wildly expensive campaigns. But considering the hard data we've walked through today, the surge in GDP, the explosion of public goods, and the vital built-in check on corruption, it is undoubtedly the best economic investment a society can make. So the real question isn't whether democracy costs too much. The real question is, looking at the staggering economic drag of autocracy, can we truly afford the alternative? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this gives you a completely new economic way to look at the business of politics.